Hello everyone, my name is Marcio and this is the first RackStep video tutorial. Today I'll give you a quick introduction to this technology. So let's get started. What is RackStep? It's a very small web framework built around Ruby Rack interface, and it's still in its early stage of development, but in the future might be an alternative to Sinatra, Camping and other micro Ruby web frameworks and libraries. RackStep is not and will never be an alternative to Ruby on Rails, Padrino, Lotus, or any other full-stack framework. The main goals of this project are: be as simple as possible. By that, I mean that using the framework should be really easy, but most important, the codebase of the framework itself and its architecture must be kept simple. As part of this concept, another main goal is to keep the source code small and implement only the necessary, no overcomplications. This project aims to allow easy implementation of microservices. If you're not familiar with this concept, it's important that you research about it. This way, it will be easier for you to understand how to use this framework. Another important characteristic is that RackStep uses a pure object-oriented approach, avoiding domain-specific languages and configuration files. Because of that, it's important that you understand object-oriented programming. You must know how to create and extend classes, call methods, include modules, etc. This is how RackStep works. First, your server will receive a HTTP request, as usual. A new instance of your application will be initialized to handle that request. This application class don't process your business logic directly. It will delegate this to a controller. Your application must have at least one controller. Each controller will handle one and only one service. Since you probably want to have more than one service, your application must decide which controller should process that request it just received. So it will delegate this responsibility to a singleton instance of the router class. Based on the path and the HTTP method of the request, the router will send back to the application which controller should handle the request. A new instance of that controller will be initialized and then, finally, the request will be processed. The controller should also decide what will be the response content type, body of the response, etc. It may sound a little too complicated right now, but don't worry, I'll show you now an example so you can see that's actually quite simple. In our example, we will create a simple service that returns the current server time in JSON format. We will create 3 small files. First, let's create a file called app. Now, let's require the RackStep framework. Then, we will need to create a class called app. You can call it whatever you like, but it must extend the RackStep app class. Inside the body of this class, we will call the addRoute method. This method expects 3 parameters. The first one is the HTTP method or verb. In this example, we will use get, but it's also possible to use other verbs like post, put, or delete. The second parameter represents the path we want to route. In our example, it's the time path, and usually each service is associated with a different path. The last parameter of the addRouter method is the name of the controller class that will process the service. In this case, it's timeController. Again, you may choose any name you like. Let's now create a file called controller and define the timeController class. Every controller must extend the RackStep controller class. Let's also define the processRequest method. This method will be invoked automatically by RackStep, and this is where your business logic should be implemented. Since we want to return a JSON with the current time, the easier way to do so is to create a hash object with that information. Another very important thing to know about RackStep is that every controller object contains an attribute called response. This object is injected by RackStep and represents the response that will be delivered to the user. By default, RackStep assumes that your controller you use JSON as the content type, but you can always override this value. Let's set the body of the response with our JSON content that we want to deliver to the user. Since we are using the JSON method, we have to require the JSON library. And that's it. Our first RackStep application example is almost complete. Now, we just need to create one more file, config.ru. This file is used to tell our Ruby web service how to run our application. You may use any rack-compatible server. In development, I like to use Shotgun or RackUp. In production, I usually use Puma or Unicorn. But again, you can choose any one you like. All of them will read this file and run your application just fine. In this example, we just need 3 lines of code. In fact, all we need to do is require our other 2 previous created files, and then we just need to tell our server what class implements our application. And that's it! Our first RackStep example is now complete. If we start the server using RackUp, Shotgun, or any other rack-compatible server, we can go to our web browser and access the server in the /time path, and we will get a JSON response with the current date and time, as expected. The example we saw here runs just fine, but it's a little incomplete. I oversimplify a few things to make it easier for you to follow, and it was a minimalistic application. I highly recommend you to use the template application as a starting point. You can find a nice official template at this address. Here is a few other things that RackStep can help you. You can add modules to your controller to access some helper methods for handling ERB templates and to handle basic access authentication. The official template is ready for production. It can be deployed at Heroku and probably other providers too. It also contains examples on how to test using Minitest, and it's ready to use SimpleCov for coverage report. Well, that's the end of this presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for watching.